May 19, 1536. The Tower of London, a French swordsman, imported specifically for his clean touch, stands ready. The crowd is silent. The Queen of England, Anne Boleyn, kneels in the straw. This isn't just a murder. It's a legal impossibility. A king killing his queen, his one true love, for adultery. But here's the problem. The evidence was fake, and everyone knew it. To understand the acts, you have to understand the man, but not the fat, bearded caricature you see in school books. We need to look at the man who thought he was a god. Welcome to Psyche of Power. Today, we aren't talking about horny kings. We are talking about the lethal intersection of desire and authority. We are going to deconstruct the psychosis of Henry VIII. Why did he do it? Not just once, but twice. Was it lust? Was it politics? No. It was a psychological survival mechanism. Most people see a tyrant. I see a man suffering from a profound, pathological fear of nothingness. Act the paradox of divine right. Henry wasn't born to be king. He was the spare. His brother Arthur was the star. When Arthur died, Henry didn't just inherit a throne. He inherited a vacuum. He spent the rest of his life trying to prove he wasn't a ghost in his brother's clothes. He was the ultimate Renaissance man. Musician, athlete, theologian. But beneath the golden boy veneer was a ticking psychological time bomb. Then came the failure. Catherine of Aragon. She gave him everything, except the one thing that proved his divine masculinity. A song. Here is where we introduce our first hard-hitting psychological concept, terror management theory, TMT. Developed by Jeff Greenberg. TMT suggests that humans are uniquely terrified by the knowledge of their own inevitable death. To cope, we create symbolic immortality. For a king in the 1500s, a son wasn't just a child. It was his soul living on, without a song. Henry's divine right was a lie. He was just a mortal meat bag waiting to rot. When Catherine failed to provide that immortality, she didn't just fail as a wife. She became a reminder of his mortality. And Henry hated being reminded he was human. He tried to divorce her. The Pope said no. The world said no. And that's when the golden boy broke. Most men would accept the status quo. Henry decided to rewrite reality. He didn't just leave the church. He declared himself the head of his own religion. Enter Anne Boleyn, the catalyst. The woman who promised him the world. Anne wasn't a victim, not at first. She was a master of mimetic desire. This is a concept by philosopher René Girard. Girard argued that we don't want things because they are inherently good. We want them because other people want them. Anne was the unavailable prize. By saying no for 7 years, Anne inflated Henry's desire into an obsession. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a conquest that would prove his ultimate power. Here is the first reversal. The marriage wasn't the goal. The hunt was. Once he possessed her, the psychological sunk cost fallacy set in. He had broken the world to get her. He had executed his friends. He had defied the Pope. The pressure on this marriage was impossible. Anne had to be perfect. But Anne wasn't a submissive queen. She was intelligent, loud, and political. She was a mirror. In psychology, we call this the narcissistic wound. A narcissist needs a self, object, someone who exists only to reflect their greatness. When Anne argued with him or failed to give him a son, she stopped being a mirror. She became a flaw, and a narcissist cannot tolerate a flaw in their own reality. Henry's reign became a parade of blood. He didn't just kill enemies. He killed the people who knew the old Henry. He was erasing his own history. To kill Anne, he had to invent a crime. Adultery, incest, witchcraft. It was a moral decoupling. He didn't see himself as a murderer. He saw himself as a victim of her betrayal. This is the core of the authoritarian, psyche-persecutory delusion. When the sword fell on Anne's neck, Henry didn't mourn. He was already planning his next wedding for the next day. Act I Wheeler's The Mirror Stage and the Void. Jane Seymour was the anti-Anne. Quiet, submissive, a white sheet for him to write his ego upon. She gave him what he wanted, a son. And then she did the most perfect thing a wife of Henry VIII could do. She died. To Henry, Jane's death was a psychological gift. She died at the peak of her utility. She never had the chance to disappoint him. She became the ghost queen, the benchmark of perfection that no living woman could ever meet. Now we see the transition. Henry is no longer the golden boy. He is becoming the butcher. His body is failing. A jousting accident left him with a festering, stinking wound on his leg. This is a crucial detail. The physical rot mirrored the moral rot. The smell of his leg preceded him. He was a living corpse, and his ego was terrified. Then came the Flanders mare, Anne of Cleves. He saw her portrait and fell in love with the image. When he met her in person, he was impotent. He couldn't perform. In the mind of a king who equates his virility with his divine right, sexual failure is a political catastrophe. He didn't blame his aging, rotting body. He blamed her. He said she smelled. He said she was ugly. She was the lucky one. She accepted the rejection. She survived because she didn't challenge his ego. She allowed him to keep his illusion of potency. Here is the second reversal. Henry's fifth wife, Catherine Howard, wasn't a romance. It was a tragedy of regressive identification. Henry was nearly 50. Catherine was maybe 17. He called her his rose without a thorn. He wasn't in love with her. He was trying to vampirize her youth. He thought that by possessing a teenage girl, he could stop time. But Catherine was a child. She did what children do. She looked for someone her own age. She looked for Thomas Culpeper. When Henry found out about her past and her infidelity, something snapped. This wasn't the rage of a husband. This was the rage of a god who realized he was a joke. He didn't just execute her. He stripped her of her dignity. He forced her to practice how to put her head on the block the night before. Think about that. The psychological cruelty is the point. He needed her to be terrified because her terror was the only thing that made him feel powerful again. When she died, the golden boy was officially dead. There was only the tyrant left. Acte Eri, the death of the father. Our third psychological tool is the golem effect. The golem effect is a psychological phenomenon where lower expectations lead to a decrease in performance, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure and violence. Henry had created a court of fear. Everyone expected him to be a monster, so he became the ultimate monster. He was trapped in the golem of his own making. His final wife, Catherine Parr, she was a nurse, a scholar, a survivor. He almost killed her. 2. He signed her arrest warrant. Why? Because she dared to have an opinion that wasn't his. She survived because she played the only card left, total submission. She told him she only argued to divert his mind from his pain. It worked. He let her live. Not because he loved her, but because his ego was fed. Look at this image. The King of England, the supreme head of the church, moved like a piece of meat on a crane. This is the ultimate irony of power. The more Henry tried to control his legacy, the more he lost control of his humanity. He died in 1547. His last words were reportedly, "Monks!" Monks. Monks. Perhaps a final hallucination of the men he had slaughtered. But death didn't end his psychosis. It just solidified it into history. Here is the final reversal. Henry killed his wives to get a son. He thought a son was his only hope for immortality. His son, Edward VIII, died as a teenager. His legacy was a footnote. The son he murdered Anne Boleyn for never mattered. It was his daughter, the failure, who became England's greatest monarch. Henry's bloodlust was mathematically useless. Why does this matter today? Because Henry VIII isn't just a historical figure. He is a psychological type. We see the Henry VIII syndrome everywhere, in corporate boardrooms, in toxic relationships, in the halls of modern power. It's the belief that my desire equals the truth, and that anyone who challenges that truth must be erased. Let's recap the psychological anatomy of a royal serial killer. 1. The fear of death. Henry killed because he couldn't accept his own mortality. He needed a son to live forever. 2. The hunt. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a trophy. Once the trophy was won, it lost its value. 3. The wound. Any sign of independence in his wives was a betrayal of his ego. This is authority. In Henry's mind, they were the same thing. To want something was to have a divine right to it. But power that requires an axe to maintain is not authority. It's just a long-form panic attack. Ask yourself, where in your life are you acting like a mini Henry? Where are you trying to control someone else just to soothe your own insecurity? History doesn't repeat itself. Human psychology does. Henry VIII didn't kill his wives because he was a king. He killed them because he was a man who couldn't govern himself. The crown didn't make him a monster. It just gave the monster a budget and a legal system. If you want to see the world through the lens of hardcore psychology, subscribe. We don't just tell stories. We break minds. They are the ones who survived in history. He is the one we analyze as a pathology. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical. This is Psyche of Power, case closed.